12-6 elbows are illegal. The UFC's got this wild rule that sounds like a geometry problem gone wrong. You can throw elbows at basically any angle except one, straight down from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. Yeah, it's as weird as it sounds. You can throw a devastating elbow at 11:30, completely legal. Switch to 12:01, and suddenly you're breaking the rules. The story behind this rule is absolutely bonkers. Back in the day, some athletic commission members watched karate demonstrations where guys were breaking ice blocks and concrete slabs with downward elbows. They figured if it could shatter concrete, it would definitely kill a human being. Problem is, they completely missed the physics. Those karate demonstrations worked because the blocks were supported underneath. In a fight, a person's head moves when you hit it, totally different impact. John Jones almost lost his title because of this rule. During his fight with Matt Hamill, Jones was absolutely demolishing the guy with legal elbows from every other angle. Then he threw a couple 12-6 elbows and got disqualified. The crazy part? Those illegal elbows probably did less damage than the legal ones he'd been throwing all fight long. Even crazier, you can throw the exact same elbow motion, but if your opponent's head is turned slightly, suddenly it becomes legal because the angle changed. It's like the rule was written by someone who failed basic physics but really loved using a protractor. MMA fighters have been mocking this rule for years. Some guys will literally adjust their body position mid-fight just to make sure their devastating elbows hit at 11:55 instead of 12:00. It's the only sport where fighters need to do geometry homework before throwing strikes. The rule's so ridiculous that even the people who enforce it admit it makes no sense. But it's still on the books, turning devastating ground and pound artists into part-time mathematicians who have to calculate elbow angles while someone's trying to choke them unconscious. No grabbing the fence or cage. This might be the most consistently ignored rule in all of mixed martial arts. Fighters grab the fence constantly, and refs hand out warnings like they're giving out participation trophies at a kid's soccer tournament. The fence grab can completely change a fight. A guy's about to get taken down, he grabs the fence, stuffs the takedown, and suddenly he's won the round. The ref gives him a warning, but the damage is already done. It's like getting a parking ticket after you've already robbed the bank. Some fighters have turned fence grabbing into a calculated risk. They know they'll get one warning before any real consequences, so they save their free fence grab for the most important moment. It's strategic rule breaking that would make white-collar criminals jealous. The weird part is how obvious it usually is. Fighters will grab the fence with both hands while looking directly at the referee, like they're testing whether the ref is actually watching the fight. Sometimes they get away with it multiple times in the same round. Referees are supposed to deduct points for repeated fence grabs, but it rarely happens. Most of the time, fighters get 3 or 4 warnings before any actual consequences. It's created this weird situation where breaking the rules has become a normal part of fight strategy. The fence grab prevention measures are pretty funny too. Some fighters tape their fingers to their gloves to make grabbing harder, but then they just grab with their whole hand instead. It's like trying to stop drunk people from doing stupid things by making the stupid things slightly more difficult. No small joint manipulation. The small joint manipulation rule prevents fighters from breaking each other's fingers and toes, which seems reasonable until you realize they're allowed to break every other bone in the human body. Apparently, small joints deserve special protection while your skull is fair game. Fish hooking creates this weird combination of pain and humiliation that's worse than most strikes. Getting punched in the face is one thing, but having someone's fingers in your mouth pulling your cheek apart feels like a violation of human dignity. Some fighters have accidentally fish-hooked opponents while attempting legal techniques. They'll be going for a rear naked choke, their fingers slip into the opponent's mouth, and suddenly they're committing a foul that looks way worse than it actually is. The small joint rule gets weird around submissions. You can legally break someone's arm with an armbar, but you can't grab their pinky and bend it backwards. It's like the rulebook was written by someone who understands joint manipulation but has strong opinions about finger safety. Enforcement of these rules is usually pretty obvious, since both techniques are hard to do accidentally. If someone's got their fingers in an opponent's mouth or is clearly bending individual fingers, it's probably intentional and definitely against the rules. No strikes to the back of the head, but it's a confusing zone. The back of the head rule sounds simple until you try to define exactly where the back of the head begins and ends during a fight where both people are constantly moving. It's like trying to draw property lines on a map while riding a roller coaster. The Mohawk area is the official definition. Imagine a Mohawk haircut running down the center of someone's skull. That's the illegal target zone. But during scrambles and ground fights, that zone moves around more than a carnival game. Some fighters have been penalized for strikes that barely grazed the back of the head, while others have landed clean shots to the prohibited area with no consequences. The difference often comes down to referee positioning and interpretation. The rule creates weird defensive strategies where fighters will deliberately turn their head to present the back to incoming strikes, essentially using the rule as a shield. It's like exploiting a glitch in a fighting video game. Ground and pound situations make this rule almost impossible to enforce consistently. When a fighter is throwing punches from top position and their opponent is moving defensively, the legal target zone changes multiple times per second. Intent matters more than accuracy with this rule. A fighter throwing a punch toward the ear that accidentally hits the back of the head gets treated differently than someone deliberately targeting the prohibited zone. No fish hooking. Fish hooking sounds like a fishing technique, but it's actually one of the most painful and degrading things you can do to another human being in combat. Sticking your fingers in someone's mouth and pulling is both effective and absolutely disgusting. The rule applies to any orifice, which creates some of the most uncomfortable rule explanations in all of sports. Referees have to explain to fighters that they can't put their fingers in mouths, noses, ears, or anywhere else that sounds like it belongs in a very different type of entertainment. Fish hooking creates this weird combination of pain and humiliation that's worse than most strikes. Getting punched in the face is one thing, but having someone's fingers in your mouth pulling your cheek apart feels like a violation of human dignity. Some fighters have accidentally fish-hooked opponents while attempting legal techniques. They'll be going for a rear naked choke, their fingers slip into the opponent's mouth, and suddenly they're committing a foul that looks way worse than it actually is. The enforcement is usually immediate because fish hooking is both obvious and incredibly unsanitary. Referees don't want fighters sharing bodily fluids through finger-to-mouth contact any more than necessary. The rule exists because early MMA fighters would literally stick their fingers wherever they could find an opening, turning professional competition into something that looked more like a street fight between angry animals. No spiking an opponent on their head, unless it's accidental. This rule separates accidental violence from intentional attempted murder, and the line is thinner than you'd think. You can absolutely spike someone's head into the canvas as long as you didn't mean to do it. Intent matters more than outcome, which creates some wild gray areas. The classic example is the suplex gone wrong. Fighter A picks up Fighter B for a standard wrestling takedown, Fighter B shifts his weight midair, and suddenly he's getting planted headfirst into the mat. Completely legal because Fighter A was just trying to execute a normal takedown. But if Fighter A deliberately picks up Fighter B and drives him headfirst into the canvas like he's trying to plant him in the ground, that's a foul. The difference between legal and illegal is often just the referee's interpretation of what the fighter was thinking mid-slam. Some of the most brutal-looking takedowns in UFC history were completely legal because they were unintentional spikes. Matt Hughes' slam of Frank Trigg looked like attempted homicide, but it was ruled legal because Hughes was just trying to take him down, not specifically target his head. Fighters have learned to make their slams look accidental even when they're not. They'll execute a takedown that clearly spikes the opponent's head, then immediately look concerned and help them up, playing the "whoops, didn't mean to do that" card. The rule creates this weird situation where the most devastating-looking moves are often legal, while less dangerous techniques get called as fouls. It's like the rulebook was written by someone who understands physics but has never actually watched a fight. No throat strikes or grabbing the trachea. The throat strike rule separates legal neck attacks from attempted murder by punch. You can hit someone in the neck all day long, but the second you target their windpipe specifically, you've crossed into illegal territory. The distinction between neck and throat strikes is harder to judge than you'd think. A hook that lands on the side of the neck is perfectly legal, but the same punch thrown 6 inches forward becomes a foul. Referees have to become anatomy experts mid-fight. Some fighters have accidentally landed throat strikes while attempting legal techniques. They'll throw a straight punch aimed at the chin, their opponent moves, and suddenly they're committing a foul that looks way more intentional than it actually was. The throat is weirdly vulnerable compared to other legal targets. You can legally break someone's nose, detach their retina, or separate their shoulder, but touching their windpipe is somehow crossing a line that the sport won't tolerate. Enforcement gets complicated because throat strikes often happen during scrambles where precision is impossible. A fighter might throw a wild strike in close quarters that accidentally hits the throat, leaving refs to decide if it was intentional targeting or just chaos. The penalty for throat strikes is usually immediate, since they can cause serious breathing problems. Unlike eye pokes that get multiple warnings, throat strikes typically result in immediate point deductions or disqualifications because the potential for permanent damage is too high. No kicks or knees to the head of a grounded opponent. This rule has turned UFC fighters into the world's most violent game of the floor is lava. If any part of your opponent's body except their feet touches the mat, they're officially grounded, and you can't knee their head. We're talking fingertips, toes, anything. Fighters figured out they could literally touch the mat with one finger and become immune to head knees. You'll see guys getting dominated in the clinch, desperately reaching down to brush the canvas with their pinky like they're trying to activate some kind of cheat code. It looks absolutely ridiculous, but it works. The three-point stance became an art form. Guys would put both feet down and touch the mat with one hand, creating this weird combat position that looks like they're about to hike a football. Suddenly, their opponent can't knee them in the head, even though they're still perfectly positioned to throw punches and elbows. Some fighters turned this into a legitimate strategy. They dropped to this position on purpose, forcing their opponent to either back off or engage in ground fighting. It's like discovering a glitch in a video game and exploiting it until the developers patch it out. The rule got even weirder when fighters started gaming it mid-exchange. A guy would be eating knees to the body, then quickly touch the ground to make head knees illegal, then pop back up to continue fighting. Refs had to start watching hand positions as closely as actual fighting techniques. Recent rule changes tried to fix this by saying, you need to have more than just fingertips down, but fighters are still finding creative ways to exploit it. It's turned mixed martial arts into a bizarre combination of violence and technical rule manipulation that would make lawyers proud. No downward stomps to the head, but body stomps are legal. This rule creates one of the weirdest targeting distinctions in all of combat sports. You can stomp on someone's ribs, legs, arms, or stomach all day long, but their head is somehow a protected zone that stomps can't enter. The head stomp was one of the most visceral techniques in early MMA and Pride. Fighters would drop opponents and then stomp their heads like they were trying to crush grapes, creating some of the most brutal highlights in combat sports history. Body stomps are still legal and can be incredibly effective. A well-placed stomp to the ribs or stomach can break bones and cause internal damage, but somehow that's more acceptable than stomping someone's head, which has protective skull bones. The rule creates weird strategic situations where fighters will stomp everything except the head. They'll systematically destroy an opponent's body with stomps while carefully avoiding the one area that would make it illegal. Some fighters have accidentally violated this rule by starting a body stomp and having their opponent's head drift into the impact zone. Suddenly, a legal technique becomes a foul because of opponent movement rather than attacker intent. The enforcement is usually pretty clear since the difference between head and body is obvious. Unlike other rules that require interpretation, this one just requires basic anatomy knowledge and the ability to see where a foot lands. No grabbing your opponent's shorts or gloves. The shorts and glove grabbing rule has turned UFC fighters into fashion police who have to monitor their grip placement while someone's trying to knock them unconscious. You can grab arms, legs, necks, and heads, but clothing and equipment are somehow off limits. Shorts grabbing is the sneakiest foul in mixed martial arts. Fighters will grab their opponent's shorts in the clinch to control their movement or prevent takedowns, and it's almost impossible for referees to see unless they're looking directly at the grip. The glove grab is even weirder because fighters wear the gloves. They're technically part of their body at that point. But grabbing inside the gloves to control fingers is illegal, creating this bizarre distinction between grabbing someone's hand and grabbing their hand covering. Some fighters have turned illegal gripping into an art form. They'll grab shorts or gloves when the referee's view is blocked, get the advantage they need, then release before getting caught. It's like pickpocketing someone while fighting them. The rule gets complicated during submission attempts. A fighter might grab an opponent's glove while defending a choke, not to gain an advantage but just to survive. Suddenly, defensive instincts become rule violations. Enforcement is inconsistent because refs can't watch every grip during scrambles. Fighters often get away with multiple violations before getting caught, making it a calculated risk rather than an absolute deterrent. No timidity, you must engage. The timidity rule is basically the UFC's way of saying, you better try to hurt each other or we'll kick you out. It's designed to prevent fighters from playing it too safe, but enforcement is wildly inconsistent. The rule exists because nobody wants to watch two professional fighters spend 15 minutes staring at each other across the octagon like they're having an awkward first date. At some point, someone needs to throw a punch or the whole thing becomes interpretive dance. Khalib Starnes became the poster child for timidity when he spent an entire fight literally running away from Nate Quarry. He wasn't just being defensive, he was actively avoiding all engagement while Quarry chased him around the octagon like it was a game of tag. The weird part is defining what counts as timidity versus intelligent defense. Some fighters are masters at making boring fights look tactical, while others get penalized for the exact same behavior. It often comes down to how frustrated the referee gets. Point deductions for timidity are rare, but when they happen, they're usually fight-changing. A fighter can spend 2 rounds playing it safe, get docked a point for timidity, and suddenly they need a finish to win. It completely flips the strategic dynamic. The rule creates this strange pressure where fighters have to balance not getting hurt with not appearing too passive. Some guys have perfected the art of looking busy while doing nothing, throwing meaningless strikes just to show engagement. No intentional throwing opponents out of the octagon. This rule exists because apparently someone thought it was necessary to clarify that the octagon isn't a wrestling ring where you can just toss people into the audience. The fact that this needed to be written down is both hilarious and concerning. Back in early UFC events, the cage was smaller and fighters were crazier. The combination created situations where guys were genuinely trying to throw each other out of the fighting area. It was like watching angry gorillas in a zoo enclosure that was too small. The rule had to specify out of rather than just into the cage because fighters were using the fence as a weapon. They'd slam opponents into the cage walls, which was legal, but actually launching them over the fence crossed the line into attempted audience member assault. Some early UFC fighters had legitimate wrestling backgrounds where throwing opponents out of bounds was a legal technique. They had to unlearn decades of muscle memory that said, when in doubt, throw the guy out of the fighting area. The enforcement would be pretty obvious, since it's hard to accidentally throw someone over an 8-foot fence. Any fighter who managed to launch an opponent into the crowd was definitely doing it on purpose, probably while screaming something intimidating. Modern UFC events make this rule almost impossible to violate since the cage is taller and the octagon is bigger. But the rule stays on the books as a reminder of the sport's wild early days when apparently anything seemed possible. No intentionally placing fingers in opponents' eyes, ears, or orifices. The eye poke rule has become one of the most controversial and frequently violated rules in modern UFC. Fighters can't deliberately target eyes, but accidental eye pokes happen about as often as taxes are due. John Jones elevated the eye poke to an art form, earning the nickname Eye Poke Jones from fans who noticed his fingers seemed to find opponents' eyes with suspicious frequency. He'd extend his fingers toward opponents' faces, claiming it was defensive, but somehow those fingers kept making eye contact. The glove design makes eye pokes almost inevitable. The UFC gloves keep fingers partially extended, creating natural eye-poking implements. It's like designing boxing gloves with built-in brass knuckles and acting surprised when people get hurt. Some fighters have learned to game the eye poke rule strategically. They'll accidentally poke an opponent's eye when they're in trouble, get a timeout to recover, and use the break to reset the fight. It's cheating that masquerades as clumsiness. Referees have to make split-second decisions about whether eye contact was intentional or accidental. Most of the time, they give fighters the benefit of the doubt, which has created an environment where eye pokes are basically consequence-free. The punishment rarely fits the crime. A fighter can temporarily blind their opponent and only get a warning, while the victim has to continue fighting with compromised vision. It's like getting a speeding ticket after causing a car accident. No applying Vaseline to your own or opponent's body. The UFC's Vaseline rules are stricter than airport security. Cutmen can only apply it to the face, and they get watched like they're handling weapons-grade plutonium. The amount of paranoia around petroleum jelly in combat sports is absolutely wild. The greasing scandal became legendary when BJ Penn accused Georges St-Pierre's corner of applying Vaseline to GSP's back between rounds. The accusation was that GSP became too slippery to grapple effectively, turning him into a human slip and slide that Penn couldn't hold onto. Athletic commissions now monitor Vaseline application like they're conducting nuclear inspections. Officials literally watch cutmen's hands during corner breaks, making sure no petroleum jelly migrates south of the cheekbones. It's probably the only job where you get watched more closely than a casino dealer. Some fighters have tried creative interpretations of the Vaseline rule. They'll apply it right at the edge of the legal zone, hoping some will accidentally smear onto illegal areas during the fight. It's like trying to accidentally spill drink on someone while technically following the rules. The enforcement gets weird because sweat naturally spreads Vaseline around during a fight. A fighter can start completely legal and end up with petroleum jelly on their neck just from normal fight movement. Refs have to make judgment calls about whether it was intentional spreading or physics. The penalty for illegal Vaseline use can be severe, including point deductions or even disqualification. It's one of the few rules where the punishment often exceeds the crime, considering you can eye poke someone 3 times and only get warnings. No clawing, pinching, or twisting skin. The skin manipulation rule covers some of the most petty and painful fouls in mixed martial arts. It's like having rules against being really annoying while also being violent. Clawing involves using fingernails to scratch or dig into an opponent's skin, which is both illegal and incredibly uncomfortable to watch. It looks more like a cat fight than professional combat. Pinching creates some of the most ridiculous-looking fouls in MMA. Imagine explaining to someone that a professional fighter got disqualified for pinching their opponent like an angry grandmother. Skin twisting is particularly nasty because it causes sharp, localized pain without creating obvious, visible damage. It's like torture disguised as a fighting technique. These fouls are hard to spot during fast exchanges, but create distinctive reactions from victims. Fighters who get clawed or pinched often have very specific facial expressions that alert referees to check for illegal contact. Enforcement is inconsistent because these fouls often happen in positions where referee visibility is limited. Fighters can get away with minor skin manipulation if they're subtle about it. You can't use the fence to help with submissions or strikes. The fence assistance rule creates a weird relationship between fighters and the octagon walls. You can lean against them, push off them, and use them for positioning, but you can't trap opponents against them for submissions or strikes. Some fighters try to use the fence as an extra limb during submission attempts. They'll trap an opponent's head or arm against the cage while applying a choke or joint lock, essentially making the fence their submission partner. The rule gets murky because determining what counts as using the fence versus just fighting near it requires referee interpretation. Sometimes positioning that looks illegal is actually just good cage awareness. Strikers have tried to use the fence to trap opponents for sustained striking attacks, essentially pinning them against the wall while landing combinations. It's effective but technically illegal. The enforcement varies depending on how obvious the fence assistance is. Subtle use often gets ignored, while blatant fence-assisted submissions typically result in immediate stoppage and position reset. Fighters have learned to make their fence use look accidental or incidental, using it for advantage while maintaining plausible deniability about their intentions. No hair pulling. The hair pulling rule is mostly irrelevant in modern UFC since most fighters keep their hair short, but it creates hilarious enforcement situations when someone shows up with a man bun or flowing locks. Back in the early UFC days, hair pulling was a legitimate concern. Fighters would grab ponytails, braids, or long hair to break posture, control opponents, or just cause pain. It looked more like a playground fight than professional competition. The rule applies to any hair on the head, which creates weird scenarios where fighters with longer hair essentially give their opponents illegal handholds. It's like bringing rope to a fight and telling people they can't use it. Some fighters with longer hair have had opponents accidentally grab their hair during scrambles, leading to awkward stops where refs have to untangle hands from hair while maintaining fight safety. The enforcement is usually obvious since hair pulling looks dramatically different from any legal grappling technique. It's hard to accidentally grab someone's hair for extended periods without realizing what you're doing. Modern fighters who keep longer hair often braid it or tie it back so tightly that grabbing it becomes nearly impossible, essentially rule-proofing their hairstyle for competition. No headbutts. Even accidental ones are watched closely. The headbutt rule creates one of the most paranoid officiating situations in all of combat sports. Referees have to monitor every head collision like they're investigating a crime scene, determining intent while managing an active fight. Head clashes happen constantly in close-range exchanges, especially when fighters are clinching or working in the pocket. Most are clearly accidental, but determining intent requires refs to be mind readers with perfect positioning. Some fighters have been accused of accidentally headbutting opponents when they're in trouble, using their head as a weapon while maintaining plausible deniability. It's like committing assault while claiming you tripped. The damage from headbutts can be severe, often causing cuts that stop fights or dramatically change momentum. When a headbutt causes significant damage, refs have to decide whether it was intentional, accidental, or just careless. Different referees interpret headbutt intent differently, leading to inconsistent enforcement. Some refs give fighters the benefit of the doubt, while others penalize any head contact that could have been avoided. The rule forces fighters to be conscious of their head positioning during exchanges, adding another layer of complexity to close-range fighting where precision is already difficult. No biting. The biting rule exists because apparently someone thought it was necessary to clarify that mixed martial arts isn't supposed to include actual cannibalism. The fact that this needed to be written down is both hilarious and deeply concerning. Biting incidents are incredibly rare in modern UFC, but when they happen, they create some of the most bizarre moments in combat sports history. It's like watching someone revert to their most primitive survival instincts on live television. The rule applies to any biting, anywhere on the opponent's body. It doesn't matter if you're trying to escape a submission or just lost your mind. Teeth are not legal weapons in professional fighting. Enforcement is usually immediate and severe, since biting is considered one of the most unsportsmanlike acts possible. Fighters who bite typically face instant disqualification, fines, and suspension. The psychological impact of being bitten during a fight is probably worse than the physical damage. Getting punched is part of the job, but getting bitten makes you question what species you're actually fighting. Modern mouthguard design makes biting more difficult, but desperate fighters in bad positions have still found ways to use their teeth as weapons when everything else fails. No throwing your mouthpiece. The mouthpiece rule catches one of the sneakiest tactics in professional fighting. Fighters figured out they could spit out their mouthpiece when hurt or tired, forcing referees to stop the action for safety while they recovered. The intentional mouthpiece ejection became an art form for fighters in trouble. They'd get rocked by a big shot, spit out their mouthpiece, and suddenly get a free timeout to clear their head and recover. Referees have to become detectives, determining whether a mouthpiece came out from impact or was deliberately expelled. It's like investigating a crime where the evidence is saliva and the suspect is getting punched in the face. Some fighters became notorious for convenient mouthpiece problems. Their mouthpiece would mysteriously fall out whenever they were in bad positions, creating suspicious patterns that refs learned to recognize. The enforcement has become stricter as refs caught on to the tactic. Fighters now face warnings, point deductions, or even disqualification for obviously gaming the mouthpiece rule. Modern mouthguard fitting has improved to make accidental loss less common, but fighters still occasionally lose them legitimately, forcing refs to make judgment calls in real time.